This episode of the Answer is Yes Baja Sessions is brought to you by Baja Bound Insurance Services. Driving to Mexico? You can buy and print out your Mexican auto insurance policy online in minutes with their easy-to-use website. They also have great travel information to help you plan your trip south of the border. Visit bajabound.com, the easiest way to get Mexican auto insurance.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Baja Sessions. It's a product of the Answer is Yes podcast. Really appreciate everybody listening in and your comments online. Keep them coming. We'd love to hear from you. And if you've got an idea for somebody to be on the show, or if you want to be on the show yourself, please reach out to me and we'll get the discussion going. I had a great time in Baja last week, and it's raining this week, so I'm not going to go down because it's probably a muddy mess. But instead, we're going to get some cool people on the line and talk about Baja Adventure and everything that's going on down there. And, you know, speaking of being introduced to people and people reaching out, I was speaking to Ryan Thomas, and he said, hey, I met a guy down in Baja that we got to talk to. And not only do you have Ryan Thomas on the line, but we have Benjy Davenport on the line. Benjy, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing today?
We're doing good. We're surviving a lot of rain here in Southern California. So you're calling from England, right?
Yes, that's correct.
You're probably my furthest phone call to date. Right on.
Fantastic.
So, I've been through your website, which is Benjy, Benjy, Davenport.com. You are on a quest of a lifetime. And I just briefly, can you tell us your background and where that story begins at?
Oh, sure. So back, must have been 2008, 2009, I decided I wanted to drive around the world. And so by the time 2011 rolled around, I was ready to leave home. The Defender was packed, and turned the key and drove from my driveway. And then fast forward like a couple of years, and that's when I was coming through, heading towards Baja, which actually became one of my favorite places.
Yeah. Now, you have some physical ailments or some health issues, as well as a dream to travel the world, and you combine those two on your quest, correct?
That's right. It's an odd one. Not many people have heard of it, but it's just I was born with the Noonan syndrome, and amongst all those, it's like one of the symptoms, but manifestations is congenital heart disease. So I was born with a hole in my heart. Mm-hmm. That got repaired, and then I still have a leaky aortic valve, which has got to be checked every year, but. Having been going through your whole life, going through school and all this kind of stuff, with being told, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it's just, I got bored of it, really, to be honest. So it just got to the point where it's like, you know what, sort of I can do whatever I like, really. There's not exactly a huge amount stopping me. So I sort of, I think, I feel like it can be down to anyone. As long as you put your mind to it, anything's achievable.
Yeah. Well, our main show is called The Answer is Yes, and that's saying yes to things and opportunities that happen in your life. And reading through your story on your website, you talk about, I don't necessarily use the word teased in your website here, but I'm sure life was challenging. But I love the part where you said you pushed yourself to communicate with strangers and communicate in ways that you thought were best that got you beyond, people's perception of you. And I think that takes an extraordinary amount of resilience and strength to get out there and do that. And I know that ultimately that led to your quest to drive around the world and all these other great adventures you're on.
Yeah, I think that's you're hitting it nail on the head there. It is that you can either sit at home and sulk, or you can get out and see the world. And especially for me anyway, it was just, there wasn't, because I did it on my own, it wasn't, I'm in a group of people, and then, each night we hang out. It's just, if I was going to want to actually have a conversation with anyone, I'd have to get out there and meet them.
Yeah.
So it's just, I feel when you're on your own, you actually put yourself out more.
Yeah, sure. You don't have a choice, right?
No, that's it. Otherwise everything becomes very lonely.
Yeah. Well, and with that being said, you briefly mentioned Defender.
Yes.
And I'm a big fan. I don't own one. I've got a few people that are collectors. But let's talk a little bit about your vehicle of choice, okay? So we know you've got the personality to reach out and not be shy to talk to people and get on your own. But you've got to have the vehicle of choice. It just so happens to be a Defender. Tell us a little bit about that truck before we talk about your adventures and when Ryan met you.
So the Defender I bought in, I think it was 2006. I bought it, and it was just my daily driver for a while. Every man and a dog seems to have a Defender over here.
Yeah.
Certainly, there's every barn on every farm's got one. I think it's the British equivalent of a F-150,
which I own.
To be honest. Yeah, there you go. Anyways, I mean, for me, I don't think there's any question in, or any other vehicle really I'd like to do it in. If you ask me that again now, I don't know. It's one of those things where you love to hate.
Yeah.
It's a vehicle that is very, very minimal. Very minimalistic rather. And it's got a lot of character about it, and I have to thank it in a lot of the ways, because for it was just, I wouldn't have been able to meet half the people that I did meet without it. And I suppose that's it's quite a outside Europe. I suppose it gets quite a unique look. It's I hate to say it, but it's the safari look, if you want.
Yeah.
When it comes to it, when you're driving around with a roof tent and all the useless stuff strapped to it, they hardly ever use, to be honest. It's people do stop you, and people do ask you, where are you going? And that's quite a nice thing as well, because it is at the end of the day, it is the conversation starter.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I asked you about it, because they're not necessarily rare over here in the U.S., but when you see one drive by, you look at it going, that person's on an adventure, or at least they're an adventurous type. And I just find it odd, not odd, but it's just classic that that's what you are driving, and that's kind of a natural vehicle from where you come from that you would gravitate towards. So anyways, as you mentioned, it's a conversation starter, because when people see it, they assume that you're on your way somewhere. So good on you for having that. I always wonder about reliability and stuff, and clearly that vehicle's stuck by you through all the challenges. I'm sure you've had a few issues in the car.
It has, yeah. I'd be lying if I said I never broke down, but it happened a few times. Just really odd things that went on it. But at the same time, I wouldn't know half the people if it hadn't broken down as well. So it's just, another one of those, really random things, because, breaking down and waiting for parts, it's because, again, it always leads you to new people. And I don't think there's been any time where I'd regret a breakdown, because you've always got to, whether you break down or not, and you can't really sulk about it, because you'd never know where that's going to lead you.
Yeah.
It sounds like a really odd thing to say, it'd be nice if, my vehicle never broke down, but at the end of the day, like, if it had been, a perfect, like, all the way through, and never gave me any trouble, then I wouldn't know, I would have met half the people that I had to have done on the whole trip. it broke down in Baja once, and that led me to other people, and I ended up just staying in Baja for a few months because of that. So it's just, if it didn't happen, then there's a chance that that wouldn't have happened. So
yeah, well, I know Ryan Thomas on the other line now, right, is shaking his head in agreement, because I'm sure he and I have both met a dozen or more people from breakdowns and race cars in the middle of Baja, and are very appreciative. Yep. And they don't always show up in a vehicle. Sometimes they show up on a horse to help you out, or they walk up. They walk up from the middle of nowhere. This is a Baja show, and you have some incredible adventures around the world. But I want to throw the questions to Ryan, because he met you in Baja. And Ryan, if you can open up the dialogue about Baja and when you met Benjy, we'd like to hear that story, because I have a feeling this could be a dozen episodes of Benjy's travels around the world. So, Ryan, why don't you take over for me when you met Benjy in Baja? Let's hear about that.
Well, actually, I'm trying to think, Benjy. I can't remember. It has to have been at least a couple of years. I made quite a few trips down there, and I'm thinking it was maybe 2015 when we met. Does that sound right, or was it 16?
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. Yeah, it's been about 3 years ago.
Yeah. So, to me, and I remember when I met you, we were in Catavina. Helicopter just landed, and I'd gone back there to do some stuff with the helicopter, and saw you and saw the Defender, and it seemed out of place, but it didn't seem out of place. It seemed out of place because you don't see them very often down there. But if you are going to go travel the back roads of the world, and Baja's got some back roads, the car actually did fit in. And I think it's interesting that you spent the time talking to Jim you did about the car, because you never said it, and neither did Jim, but I'm sitting here thinking, well, yeah, I mean, this car has become part of you. It's become part of your life story. You wouldn't have met the people you've met and done the things you've done if it hadn't broken down. All of those components it's all part of your life story. So it's fitting that's what stood out when I first met you. I think that the next thing that I just wanted to point out and then ask you a question about it is, I'm looking at your homepage on your website, and you got a blue line that basically spans the entire continents of Europe and Asia, from one side to the other. And you've gone from what appears to be the southern border of the United States all the way up to the northern part of Alaska and back, and across the United States, and gone down to Guatemala. And I believe I hear you say in talking with Jim that Baja was one of your most memorable or favorite places. And I think it's kind of compelling, kind of interesting. We're on a show talking about Baja. You've been literally almost all around the world in a vehicle, and Baja stands out. So I guess the big question is why?
It's, I tell you what, I really wish I knew the answer to that, but it's one of those things where Baja is one of those places, like I've driven it a couple of times now, because I drove it with you when I met you on the Rip to Cabo, and back in 2015, and I ended up staying there for a few months there, with just meeting some pretty great people, and also I went from there. Then I continued, through Mexico and Belize and Guatemala, and then due to the whole hiccup because the car's British, it's right-hand drive. So in the time I took and eventually got down to Guatemala, a lot of the countries down in Central America now are stopping right-hand drive cars going through the borders. My car also got basically impounded for like 5 days because it's right-hand drive. So I had turn around.
There's a good note for the listeners. If you've got a right-hand drive car, maybe think twice before you go into mainland Mexico. It didn't sound like you had problems in Baja, right?
No, Baja's fine. Mexico's fine. Guatemala's fine. But if you are going to go further afield, and El Salvador's now stopping cars. Costa Rica was the first one to put that in place. So